The Atlanteans are now playable for the first time ever in Age of Mythology Retold. It looks like they've had a massive rework, so let's have a look at some of the changes. The biggest change is their citizens are now 2 population instead of 3, which basically means they're worth 2 Greek villagers instead of the 3 Greek villagers they were before. This in itself is a huge change, with a ripple effect on the macro, the build orders, and balance of everything with the Atlanteans. They still drag around that donkey with them, so there's no need for drop-off sites like granaries or storehouses, but this does bring them more in line macro-wise with some of the other civs. There were a few issues with the old 3-pop citizens. They were so tanky and hard for your opponent to raid, as they just had way more health than a normal villager. But if you did lose one, especially early in the Classical Age, it felt awful, and your economy really suffered for it. You normally advance to the Classical Age with 7 villagers, so if you lost one to an early rush, or an early raid, that's a 7th of your economy gone, which is just brutal. There was also a lot less flexibility with the macro. Other civs can easily move 1 or 2 villagers off of a resource to fix their economy up. Citizens were much more restricted, and they were essentially just a group of 3 villagers running around. They did of course have the added benefit that they didn't have to build a storehouse to move on to something else, so the gold miner could chop wood for 30 seconds and then move back, but it always felt a bit awkward and not many people utilised it like that. I really like this citizen change. I feel like this both helps the Atlantean player and their opponent. Although with no drop-off sites and still half the economy to manage than any of the other civs, it still does make them easier than any of the other pantheons to play. Maybe it's good for an easy civ to learn to play. Favour. Favour is no longer passively gained by town centres, it's gathered with Oracle Vision. Basically, the more line of sight your oracles have, the more favour income you have. I'm a big fan of making the favour gather rate a bit more unique for the Atlanteans. In the original version, the Atlanteans gain favour from town centres, and it just made it feel like a free resource, as it's not something you're actively choosing to gather from, and if you went to go get a second town centre, you were doing that for more villagers and extra population, rather than the slight extra favour trickle you get. You were also quite limited of when you could spend your favour. Yes, it was a free resource, but if you got loads of Prometheans in the Classical Age, then you would have to wait ages to use it in the Heroic Age to get any Stymphalian birds out. And then if you wanted to go for Stymphalian birds, you would just have to forego the Prometheans from the early age. So this really fixes that up. You are limited to the amount of oracles you can build, and I believe the line of sight can't overlap with each other. Otherwise you would just have 10 oracles set by your town centre collecting favour for you. It feels a bit more like the Greeks, where you need to spend population to gather favour, but it's at slightly less cost because you can build these guys out of the temple rather than using villagers out of the town centre. It's hard to say what the best strategy will be for farming favour with the oracles, whether or not it's having loads around your base, or using them like an Egyptian obelisk and hoping they don't get found out, or maybe hiding them in the corners of the map like a stray Loki house. The oracles also got a nice quality of life change. Their vision doesn't fully reset on movement anymore. Each step the oracle takes drops the line of sight slightly, and when you stop again, it retains the level of line of sight that you had. These are the sort of changes that I'm loving about Retold. I really hated when you had full line of sight with an oracle, and the town centre you were trying to scout was slightly out of range. Then you would take one step forward, and you would completely lose vision, and need to wait another 30 seconds for your oracle to wave his stick around. Manners. Manners got a huge nerf. You can now only garrison 2 villages inside a manor, rather than the old manor where you could fit 5 citizens in, which is the equivalent of 15 Greek villages, or 7.5 of the new citizens. With it costing more for Atlanteans to wall, they can't just send 1 villager over to the wall, they have to send 2. I can see the need for extra safety, but I've never liked the tech of hiding in manors, even if it is only 2, it's just felt a bit cheap. But even if a gold mine now has 2 manors on it, they can only garrison 4 villages, so you can still get some good raids off. There are however more manors available to the player with the increase in population. They now have access to 8 manors, giving 20 population each, which matches up with the 16 houses for 10 population of all the other civs. Heroizing. Heroizing units takes a lot longer. I've never really known what to think about the Atlantean hero system. They have no strict hero units, but any human unit can become a hero. There's obviously a bonus here, because you can make a unit and transform it into a hero whenever you want, but it's also like paying for a unit twice, and they end up being really expensive, especially if you compare it to the 100 gold priest or a Hersa. In the old game, that's what made god powers like Valor so strong, and almost necessary, which in turn made Gaia really weak because she didn't have access to the minor god Prometheus, which gives you the Valor god power. But now heroizing is not instant, and it takes a few seconds to carry out. They kind of hover there limp for a few seconds, and then they're shiny. Right now, it feels a bit clunky, and maybe that's because I'm used to the old way. But in an ideal world, you're going to need to prepare before the fight takes place, otherwise your unit's just going to get hit. You can also attack units that are becoming heroes, and they lose their HP. I don't know if they have some kind of buff where they have more armor while they're heroizing, but imagine paying loads for a destroyer hero for it to just come out with 1 HP when you're finished. On the plus side, you can now get a hero Cairo Ballista, which feels so good against the myth units. I can see a reason for this heroizing change. Maybe it is too OP for a whole army of heroes to just appear in front of a myth unit in half a second. God powers. Atlantean god powers are different to the other civs, as they were created and balanced around having cooldowns. Now every god power has a cooldown, so the Atlanteans need theirs to stand out amongst the rest. They now have a shorter cooldown and favour cost compared to other civs. Other civs will use a god power like Restoration, and it costs around 100 favour to use again after a few minutes. Gaia can drop a Carnivora, and then pay 20 favour to use it again. Some god powers have been updated, but they basically work the same, like spider eggs. Instead of just dropping them randomly, you can choose where they go in a line pattern, whereas other god powers have changed quite a bit. Valor, as we mentioned earlier, now only targets 1 unit and fully heals the unit and converts it to a hero, instead of the 3 human units and 1 villager like before. But with this god power, to reuse it, it costs 1 extra favour each time, or at least that's what I saw, and it makes the hero instantly and instantly heals them. So it does seem like a pretty good god power. Chaos now makes enemy units fight each other rather than transforming units into Gaia units. This one seemed absolutely brutal. It was such a small radius, but it seemed to go on forever, and I could imagine getting a massive advantage from this god power. But it did cost 50 to use again, which is quite a lot for a reusable Atlantean god power. And of course, all the visuals have been updated. The new version of Implode with the updated lighting and particle effects just looks insane. Now, what are the differences between the new Atlantean gods and the old ones? What I've got here is a screenshot of the new god techs compared to the old ones. So let's have a look at them. Kronos, of course, still has access to his time shift ability. His buildings are constructed 25% faster per nearby mana, which seems like a random change. I'm assuming they've done this because they want it similar to the Egyptians, where they all have something next to their monuments, but next to a manor seems a bit strange. Atlanteans normally build around their manors anyway, because that's where they put their citizens. So maybe it's a good change, but this one just seems a bit strange. But this one does not. Receive 2 free myth units instead of 1 when advancing to the next age. This means the Kronos Rush, the Crush, just got a whole lot better. If somebody couldn't deal with it before, they now have an extra Promethean to deal with. But of course, they don't have the OP Valor God power anymore. But something that I really do like about this one is going to the Heroic Age. If you go through Rhea, that means you get 2 Behemoths, and if you build 1 more, 3 Behemoths in about 30 seconds after you go up to the Heroic Age, if you have a time-shifted temple, could be absolutely brutal to take down a town center. Another new tech is Lost Siege and Myth units return 20% of their resource cost. So this is instead of them having 10% extra movement speed. I think I like this, especially if you get the favor back from the Myth units, that could be pretty good. And his unique tech has been changed. It used to be something for you to make your oracles line of sight faster, but maybe with the oracles changing up, they felt like they needed to change the unique tech as well. So it looks like when you get this tech, you can time shift 2 buildings at once rather than just 1, and it costs less for a palace and a tower. Kronos is someone that really wants to make the most of this time shift, and if you can do 2 at once, you can just be constantly doing things. I think it could be pretty nice, especially because other buildings are now free instead of costing the 5 wood that it used to be. I know 5 wood isn't a lot, but it's going to add up if you can do 2 at once, whereas being free just makes it so much better. Next up is Aranos. Aranos can build a new sky passage in every age, so I'm assuming because of the Wonder Age, that means he can build 5, 1 in each age. I haven't used this yet. I only played Aranos in 1 game, and I built 2 sky passages, and I didn't really use them, so I don't know exactly how this works, but it says units can travel instantly between them, so I assume it's very similar to the old game. Aranos looks like he's lost the ability to see every settlement. I'm assuming this is because in Retold, you can't see when an enemy takes a town center. It doesn't show up on the UI, and it doesn't show up on the minimap unless you scout it. If you could see all the town centers, that would just be a unique thing for Aranos that he can see when you've built a town center, which is probably pretty broken. if nobody else can do it. But instead it looks like all units have an extra 5 line of sight, and damaged enemy units remain visible for 25 seconds. So he still has the whole sight thing going on. But there's one thing that's missing, and that is the thing which made Aranos broken, which is 10% extra human movement speed. But it does come with his unique tech, but instead of all units, it's just infantry units. Maybe we're at an age now where Aranos won't be the most broken god every single time because of his extra speed. And if you want the extra speed, even for just the infantry, you're going to have to pay for it, and I like that change. Aranos needed a nerf. And last up we have Gaia, with the weird group picture. So she now starts with hero citizens instead of normal citizens. In Age of Mythology Retold, each civ starts with an extra villager from what they did on the base game, and Gaia starts with 2 hero citizens, which is a pretty nice change, and promoting to hero citizens costs 25% less, which is a nice change again for Gaia being the economy god. Her economic guild upgrades cost 30% less and can be researched and age early. So this is the same as what it used to be on EE for the cost being less, but the age early is off of Voobly, because on Voobly, on one of the later Voobly balance patches, she could research any eco tech in any age, which was probably a bit broken, so I like the extra age early, especially as the new hunting dogs is just in the heroic age. So if you get a very high hunt map, in the classical age you can get hunting dogs basically for Gaia, and it's a very nice bonus. Economic buildings like town centres, manors, economic guilds and markets grow lush. So lush isn't on every building anymore, it's just the economic buildings, and lush heals friendly units and buildings. I feel this is a nice change, so the lush just isn't spread everywhere, and it doesn't say anything about enemies can't build on the lush. So they've obviously taken that out, which was very frustrating, especially as it was spread from every building. And it looks like her unique upgrade channels has been changed. So I bought this earlier and I just assumed that it was the same where it used to give villagers extra movement speed, but actually Gaia increases the speed of any unit travelling on her lush by 15%. And 15% is pretty fast, so you just need to spread those economic guilds everywhere to get some fast units. So those are all the changes. Let me know what you think of the new Atlanteans. Anything you like, anything you don't like, and I'll see you in the next one.